Hi, welcome to the Hurricane Utah Adult Religion class, sponsored by the Hurricane Utah North Stake of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm Mike Parker, and since 2008, it's been my privilege to be the instructor for this class. The Hurricane Utah Adult Religion class meets on Thursday evenings between September and May to discuss the scriptures, teachings, and history of the restored Church of Jesus Christ. If you live in or are visiting the Hurricane St. George area, I'd love to have you join us. Time and location are available on the class website. There's a link to that in the show notes just below this video. Also on the class website, you can download my notes, which includes footnotes documenting my sources, this PowerPoint presentation, and handouts that I distribute in class. Please note that this YouTube channel and the class website are not official sites of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Hurricane Utah North Stake, or any other church unit or department. I alone am responsible for the content on these sites. What you're about to see is a recording of my notes for one of the lessons. If you enjoy this video, please click the like button and share it with a friend. And please feel free to subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new content is posted to this channel. My friends, the gospel of Jesus Christ is true. Joseph Smith was a prophet of God, and the authority and keys that he held are now vested in the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And most importantly, Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Savior of the world. I hope you enjoy this lesson. With this lesson, we move into the last section of the Old Testament, known as the prophets. Our study of the prophets begins with the books of Amos, Hosea, Jonah, and Micah. I've prepared two handouts for this lesson. The first handout is a timeline of the prophetic books that visualizes when they were written. The second explains the allegory of the bride and the bridegroom that's found in Hosea and also used or referred to in many other passages of Scripture. There are links in the show notes to download these handouts in PDF format. You can also go to www.huarc.org to download all the handouts, notes, and slideshows from this course. The writings of the prophets are different from the writings of the law, the historical writings, and wisdom and poetry literature. These writings are oracles, utterances given by God to a prophet in response to an inquiry or a message of judgment against people who have offended God. Although prophets and prophecies go back to the beginning of human history, the earliest writings of the Old Testament prophets are dated well after the time of David and Solomon. Apart from Jonah, all the prophetic books were, or at least claimed to have been, written by the prophet after whom the book is named. These books typically begin with a superscription that identifies the author and explains that the words that follow were from God. For example, the book of Isaiah begins with the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. The book of Jeremiah commences with the words of Jeremiah, to whom the word of the Lord came. And the book of Ezekiel starts with, the word of the Lord came expressly unto Ezekiel. The writings of the prophets are written largely in Hebrew poetic verse, something I discussed in the last lesson. We can't see the poetic structure in the verses in our King James Bible, but a perceptive reader can usually spot it. A modern English Bible translation can also help you identify poetic passages. The prophets are typically divided into two groups. The major prophets, consisting of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel, and the minor prophets, consisting of Hosea through Malachi. The minor prophets are also sometimes referred to as the Book of the 12. The terms major and minor do not refer to their importance, but to their length. The books of the major prophets are all longer than those of the minor prophets. The prophetic books are not organized in your Bible in chronological order. Rather, they are grouped by length first and then by date. Some of the traditional dates that determine the order in which they were placed later were found to be incorrect. In this Old Testament course, I'll cover them in the likely order in which they were written, beginning in this lesson with Amos, Hosea, Jonah, and Micah. First, let me recap some of the history of Israel and Judah from lesson 15. After the death of Solomon, about 931 BC, his kingdom was divided in two. The northern kingdom was called Israel, or Ephraim. The southern kingdom was called Judah. The four prophets I'll be discussing in this lesson lived during the 8th century BC, about 200 years after the kingdoms were divided. During this period, the kingdom of Assyria was the dominant regional power. Israel and Judah were vassal states to the Assyrians, paying tribute to them and in return receiving a measure of independence and security. The light blue area on this map indicates the approximate boundaries of Assyria around 723 BC during the ministry of Hosea and just before the ministry of Micah. The following year, 722 to 721 BC, Assyria overthrew the kingdom of Israel and deported her people to the east. The book of Amos is probably the earliest of the surviving Old Testament prophetic writings. Amos was not a professional prophet in service at the temple. He was a herdsman and a grower of sycamore fig trees. He was from Tekoa, a small village in the southern kingdom of Judah, about 10 miles south of Jerusalem. His name, Amos, means burden. This name has connections to the writings of other prophets. Malachi referred to his calling as the burden of the word of the Lord. And the Book of Mormon prophet Jacob told the Nephites that the word of God burdens me because of your grosser crimes. Although Amos was from the kingdom of Judah, he ministered in the northern kingdom of Israel. According to the book's superscription, Amos prophesied during the long and peaceful reign of King Jeroboam II of Israel. Amos's ministry was probably during the decade between 760 and 750 BC. During this time, the northern kingdom was at the height of its prominence and prosperity. As we see so often in the scriptures, however, Israel's prosperity had turned her people to wickedness. During Amos's time, there were gross inequalities between wealthy and poor individuals, and affluent landowners manipulated debt and credit to take land away from small family farmers. After Amos was called as a prophet by the Lord, he went to Bethel, the capital of Israel, where Jeroboam II lived. At that time, Bethel was the center of Israelite idol worship. The book of Amos has three major parts. Chapters 1 and 2 are an ethical tour of the nations in the region of Israel, in which the Lord pronounced judgments on them for their wickedness. Chapters 3 through 6 contain three prophetic sayings that indicted Israel for sin and injustice. Chapters 7 through 9 contain the visions of Amos, including a dialogue with Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, and a final speech of comfort addressed to the kingdom of Judah. In chapters 1 and 2, Amos pronounced a series of judgments on the surrounding nations. His Israelite audience probably listened with delight as he listed the wicked things their enemies had done and how God was going to judge them. Amos seems to have used these speeches to build to a climax. He started with foreigners, then denounced Israel's neighbors, and then the seventh speech was against the kingdom of Judah. The number 7 was significant to ancient Hebrews, so his audience probably would have expected that the judgments against Judah were the conclusion of his sermon. They certainly would have been pleased that their rival neighbors were going to get what was coming to them. First, judgment against Damascus, the Syrians, because they have threshed Gilead with threshing instruments of iron. Second, judgment against Gaza, the Philistines, because they carried away captive an entire population to deliver them up to Edom as slaves. Third, Tyre, the Phoenicians, for their slave trade with Edom. Fourth, Edom, for pursuing his brother with the sword. Fifth, Ammon, because they ripped open Gilead's pregnant women so they could expand their territory. Sixth, Moab, for desecrating graves. Seventh, Judah, for rejecting the law of the Lord, not keeping the commandment, and following false gods instead of the one true God. One can almost hear the cheering from Amos's audience as each of Israel's neighbors, one by one, was condemned. But then, surprise, Amos added an unexpected eighth item to the list. The Lord condemned the people of Israel for oppressing the innocent and the poor, engaging in pagan religious practices, abusing the system of pledges and fines, and showing lack of respect for God's consecrated men and prophets. Amos had written earlier that he was going to list 3 transgressions and for each of the nations, but he ended up naming 4 sins only for Israel. He didn't give 4 sins for the other nations because Israel was the real target of the Lord's coming judgment. Israel's sins don't sound nearly as bad as those of the other nations. So why did the Lord consider Israel's transgressions to be worse than those of the people who surrounded her? Amos 3, verses 1 through 2, King James Version. Quote, "Hear this word that the Lord hath spoken against you, O children of Israel, against the whole family which I brought up from the land of Egypt, saying, You only have I known of all the families of the earth. Therefore I will punish you for all your iniquities." Unquote. Israel was a chosen people. They probably thought that meant they were immune from the Lord's judgment, that it didn't matter what they did. To the Lord, however, being chosen meant that they were held to a higher standard. This principle was reiterated to the saints in the latter days through the prophet Joseph Smith in Doctrine and Covenants 82, verse 3. Quote, "For of him unto whom much is given, much is required, and he who sins against the greater light shall receive the greater condemnation." Unquote. There's a temptation for us to want to earn or deserve God's blessings, but we don't earn his blessings by being good. Rather, we free him to graciously bless us. We don't earn his grace. We can only meet his requirements to receive it. Next in chapter 3, Amos used 7 rhetorical questions to show that God always reveals what he intends to do through his prophets. Verses 3 through 6 illustrate cause and effect and lay the logical foundation for verses 7 through 8. The answer to each rhetorical question Amos asked is no, obviously not. Amos 3, verses 3 through 8, New Revised Standard Version. Quote, "Do 2 walk together unless they have made an appointment? No. Does a lion roar in the forest when it has no prey? No. Does a young lion cry out from its den if it has caught nothing? No. Does a bird fall into a snare on the earth when there is no trap for it? No. Does a snare spring up from the ground when it has taken nothing? No. Is a trumpet blown in a city and the people are not afraid? No. Does disaster befall a city unless the Lord has done it? No. Surely the Lord God does nothing without revealing his secret to his servants, the prophets. The lion has roared. Who will not fear? The Lord God has spoken. Who can but prophesy?" Unquote. The meaning of verses 7 and 8 is, just as obvious and certain as those things are, the Lord Jehovah will do nothing without first revealing his intentions and plans to his servants, the prophets. When a prophet receives a divine message, he must speak. In this instance, God's plan was to destroy and scatter the people of Israel. Amos prophesied that only a remnant or pieces of Israel would remain when the Assyrian captivity came. In chapters 3 through 6, Amos delivered 3 messages of prophetic judgment. The heart of his message is found in chapter 5, verses 21 through 24. From the English Standard Version, quote, I hate, I despise your feasts, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fattened animals, I will not look upon them. Take away from me the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps, I will not listen. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Unquote. Through Amos, the Lord told the wicked people of Israel that he hated and rejected their religious offerings and celebrations, and commanded them to let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. This message still strikes home today. It's easy to think that we're righteous because we can tick the boxes to prove it. We pay our tithing, we observe the word of wisdom, we attend our church meetings, and so forth. But do we love our neighbor as ourselves? Do we seek justice for the oppressed? Do we show kindness to those who are difficult to love? Do we seek the truth, even when doing so is not to our personal advantage? We aren't asked about those things in the Temple Recommend interview, but they are at least as important as the things that we are asked. Amos then recorded a series of visions, beginning with 3 visions of destruction. Each of these visions follows the same pattern: the Lord's promise of destruction, followed by Amos's plea for mercy, concluded by the Lord's suspension of judgment. The first vision was of destruction by a swarm of locusts. Amos 7, verses 1 through 3, New Revised Standard Version, quote, This is what the Lord God showed me. He was forming locusts at the time the latter growth began to sprout. It was the latter growth after the king's mowings. When they had finished eating the grass of the land, I said, O Lord God, forgive, I beg you. How can Jacob stand? He is so small. The Lord relented concerning this. It shall not be, said the Lord. Unquote. The second was a vision of destruction by a shower of fire. Amos 7, verses 4 through 6, New Revised Standard Version, quote, This is what the Lord God showed me. The Lord God was calling for a shower of fire, and it devoured the great deep and was eating up the land. Then I said, O Lord God, cease, I beg you. How can Jacob stand? He is so small. The Lord relented concerning this. This also shall not be, said the Lord God. Unquote. The third and final vision was of a plumb line. Amos 7, verses 7 through 9, New Revised Standard Version, quote, This is what he showed me. The Lord was standing beside a wall built with a plumb line in his hand. And the Lord said to me, Amos, what do you see? And I said, a plumb line. Then the Lord said, See, I am setting a plumb line in the midst of my people Israel. I will never again pass them by. The high places of Isaac shall be made desolate, and the sanctuaries of Israel shall be laid waste, and I will rise against the house of Jeroboam with the sword. Unquote. In the third and final vision, the Lord showed Amos a wall that was not perfectly vertical. The Lord held up a plumb line to demonstrate how much the wall leaned to one side. A plumb line is a weight, called a plumb bob, that is suspended from a string. This instrument has been used for thousands of years by bricklayers, masons, and carpenters as a visual reference to ensure that walls and fences were plumb or perfectly upright. The Lord's message in Amos's vision was that Israel was out of line and didn't measure up to his standards. In the first 2 visions, Amos had asked the Lord for mercy, and the Lord had relented. But in the final vision of the plumb line, the Lord refused to change his mind. I will never again pass them by or overlook their sin or spare them, because they deserved the judgment he had decreed. One of the Lord's judgments, Amos foretold, was an end to divine revelation. Amos 8, verses 11 through 12, King James Version. Quote, Behold, the days come, saith the Lord God, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. And they shall wander from sea to sea, and from the north even to the east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of the Lord, and shall not find it. Unquote. This prophecy was fulfilled when the Lord stopped sending prophets to the people of Israel and allowed them to be taken captive by the Assyrians. But the Lord did not leave the people of Israel without hope. Amos's prophecies concluded with a promise of a day when both the land and its people would be restored. Amos 9, verses 13 through 15, English Standard Version. Quote, Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him who sows the seed. The mountains shall drip sweet wine, and all the hills shall flow with it. I will restore the fortunes of my people Israel, and they shall rebuild the ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine, and they shall make gardens and eat their fruit. I will plant them on their land, and they shall never again be uprooted out of the land that I have given them, says the Lord your God. Unquote. The ultimate purpose of God's judgments is not revenge, it is restoration. The Lord chastens us because he loves us and wants us to return to him. Amos's last prophecy is still waiting to be fulfilled. The Lord Jesus Christ will return and restore the people of Israel permanently. Hosea was another prophet of the northern kingdom of Israel. He was a contemporary of Amos who prophesied in the 30 years leading up to the Assyrian conquest in circa 722 through 721 BC. His name, Hosea, means salvation. His hometown and profession are not mentioned, and little is known about his life other than his marriage to Gomer, a prostitute. That marriage is part of the message of the opening chapters of the book. Hosea was intensely critical of Israel's existing political and religious institutions. He warned Israel that she had violated her claim for dependence on the Lord and would therefore be left barren and desolate. In essence, her people would find themselves again in the wilderness. The book has two major sections. Chapters 1 through 3 contain a long passage that used Hosea's marriage as an allegory of the Lord's relationship to Israel. Chapters 4 through 14 contain a series of prophetic speeches about the chaotic days that would follow the fall of Israel to Assyria. Like Amos, Hosea spoke out in condemnation of Israel's immorality, greed, and injustice. Hosea 4, verses 1 through 2, New English Translation, quote, Hear the word of the Lord, you Israelites, for the Lord has a covenant lawsuit against the people of Israel. For there is neither faithfulness nor loyalty in the land, nor do they acknowledge God. There is only cursing, lying, murder, stealing, and adultery. They result to violence and bloodshed. Unquote. Because of their wickedness and disloyalty, Hosea prophesied that God would use the Assyrians as a tool to mete out punishment upon Israel. Hosea 8, verses 1 through 3, English Standard Version, quote, Set the trumpet to your lips. One like a vulture is over the house of the Lord, because they have transgressed my covenant and rebelled against my law. To me they cry, My God, we, Israel, know you. Israel has spurned the good. The enemy shall pursue him. Unquote. After Israel was overthrown by the Assyrians, Hosea further prophesied that her people would become wanderers among the nations. But, also like Amos, Hosea uttered prophecies of restoration and reconciliation. In this moving passage, the Lord compared his relationship to Israel to a husband whose wife had been unfaithful. Hosea 2, verses 5 through 7 and 14 through 16, New English Translation. Quote, "For their mother has committed adultery. She who conceived them has acted shamefully. For she said, I will seek out my lovers. They are the ones who give me my bread and my water, my wool, my flax, my olive oil, and my wine. Therefore, I will soon fence her in with thorns. I will wall her in so that she cannot find her way. Then she will pursue her lovers, but she will not catch them. She will seek them, but she will not find them. Then she will say, I will go back to my husband, because I was better off then than I am now. However, in the future, I will allure her. I will lead her back into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. From there, I will give back her vineyards to her and turn the valley of trouble into an opportunity for hope. There she will sing as she did when she was young, when she came up from the land of Egypt. At that time, declares the Lord, you will call my husband. You will never again call me my master." Unquote. Ultimately, what the Lord demanded of Israel through Hosea was the same thing that he demanded of them through Amos. Hosea 6, verse 6, New Revised Standard Version, quote, "For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." Unquote. The outward offerings of the Israelites were not nearly as important as their covenant loyalty and faithfulness to the covenant the Lord had made with them and their unwavering love for him as their God. The book of Jonah itself tells us nothing about Jonah or when he prophesied, but he is mentioned in 2 Kings 14, verse 25. From this single verse, we learn he was a prophet of the northern kingdom of Israel. He was active during the reign of King Jeroboam II, who came to power circa 788 BC, making Jonah a contemporary of Amos and Hosea. He was from Gath Hepher, a small village near Nazareth. He prophesied accurately that Jeroboam II would recapture certain borderlands from Syria. The book of Jonah is unique among the writings of the prophets in the Old Testament. Rather than being an account written by Jonah, the book is mostly a narrative about Jonah. It also uses Jonah as a negative example. This would be like us basing a primary lesson on a story about a president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints being caught smoking behind the barn when he was a boy. There isn't any such story that I'm aware of course. Because of the rational and historical difficulties in the book of Jonah, for centuries there has been vigorous debate over whether it's a record of actual events or an extended allegory. Many Old Testament scholars believe the story is a parable that took the historical prophet Jonah and used him to teach an important moral principle. In 1922, Presidents Charles W. Penrose and Anthony W. Ivins, counselors in the First Presidency, conceded that the story of Jonah could be an ancient parable designed to teach a moral lesson. They wrote that, quote, "It is of little significance as to whether Jonah was a real individual or one chosen by the writer of the book to illustrate what is set forth therein." Unquote. The superscription sets up the story. Jonah 1, verses 1 through 3, King James Version, quote, "Now the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up before me. But Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and went down to Joppa, and he found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare thereof, and went down into it, to go with them unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord." Unquote. The city of Nineveh was on the eastern bank of the Tigris River. It was the capital city of Assyria, and one of the oldest cities in the world. Joppa was a seaport on the Mediterranean coast. It was part of the northern kingdom of Israel at the time of Jonah. Tarshish was far across the Mediterranean Sea to the west. Its location hasn't been identified, but it could have been a seaport in southwest Spain. It also may have referred to distant Mediterranean coastlands in general, or it may possibly just have meant the open sea. The point, regardless, is that Jonah was leaving for the ends of the known world in precisely the opposite direction of Nineveh. The opening verses of the book of Jonah don't disclose his motive for fleeing from the Lord's assignment. His reasoning was intentionally withheld from the readers to build suspense. We'll learn what Jonah's reason was later in the story. We're all familiar with what happened next. When a great storm arose at sea, Jonah convinced the sailors that he was to blame, and the only way to appease his God and end the storm was to throw him overboard. We can contrast Jonah's unfaithfulness with the piety of the pagan sailors. When the lot fell on Jonah, he confessed that he worshipped Jehovah, the God of heaven, who hath made the sea and the dry land. That is a powerful God. At first, the men refused to cast him overboard because they were afraid they would offend Jonah's God even more by risking his life. When the storm became worse, they decided to do as he requested and prayed that Jehovah, the God of Jonah, would not hold them responsible for their actions. After they tossed Jonah overboard, the storm ended. The sailors offered sacrifices and made vows to Jonah's God. Jonah, the prophet of Israel, had been disobedient to God and had even tried to flee from him. On the other hand, the sailors, non-Israelite pagans, were respectful and devout to a foreign god. The Lord arranged for a large fish to swallow Jonah, and he was trapped in its stomach for 3 days and nights. While he was in the fish's stomach, Jonah offered a prayer in the form of a psalm. In it, he compared his experience in the fish to being in the grave. This prayer was written in Hebrew poetic verse, like the Psalms and Proverbs. The Lord heard Jonah's prayer, and the fish vomited him up onto dry land. The Lord then repeated his command to go to Nineveh. This time, Jonah obeyed. When Jonah finally arrived at the enormous city of Nineveh, he finally delivered a brief and simple prophecy. Jonah 3, verses 4 through 10, English Standard Version. Quote, "Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's journey, and he called out, 'Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown.' And the people of Nineveh believed God. They called for a fast and put on sackcloth, from the greatest of them to the least of them. The word reached the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne, removed his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he issued a proclamation and published throughout Nineveh, 'By the decree of the king and his nobles, let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock taste anything. Let them not feed or drink water, but let man and beast be covered with sackcloth, and let them call out mightily to God. Let everyone turn from his evil way and from the violence that is in his hands. Who knows? God may turn and relent and turn from his fierce anger, so that we may not perish.' When God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil way, God relented of the disaster that he had said he would do to them, and he did not do it." Unquote. Once again, everyone in the story was more faithful and obedient to Jehovah, the God of Israel, than Jonah, his prophet, had been. Based on Jonah's prophetic warning, which consisted of only a single statement. The king and all the people of Nineveh, one of the largest cities in the world, none of whose inhabitants were worshippers of Jehovah, repented in the most extreme way someone in the ancient world could show remorse, even to the point of covering their animals in sackcloth. Verse 9 makes it appear that the king didn't know if Jonah's prophecy was conditional, if Jonah's God would not destroy the city if Nineveh and everyone in it repented. But he acted on the assumption or hope that it was conditional. And the king's assumption was correct. When the Lord saw that the people of Nineveh, quote, turned from their evil way, he relented of the disaster that he had said he would do to them, and he did not do it, unquote. The King James Bible translates verse 10 as, God repented of the evil that he said he would do. But the passage does not mean that God repented of evil or wickedness. Rather, he chose to act in a way different than what he had originally intended. In chapter 4, we finally get to the reason Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh in the first place. Jonah 4, verses 1 through 3, New Revised Standard Version, quote, but this was very displeasing to Jonah, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is not this what I said while I was still in my own country? That is why I fled to Tarshish at the beginning, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and ready to relent from punishing. And now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. Unquote. Jonah had initially fled in the opposite direction from Nineveh because he knew that it's God's nature to be gracious and forgiving. He suspected that if he preached in Nineveh and its people repented, the Lord would forgive them. But Jonah didn't want them to be forgiven. He wanted God to destroy them. He felt so strongly about this that he begged the Lord to take his life instead of watching the Ninevites not get punished. The moral of the story is revealed in the incident with the gourd in chapter 4. Jonah went out of Nineveh, sat down outside the city, and waited to see what would happen to it. The Lord caused a plant to grow that gave Jonah shade. This greatly pleased Jonah. The Lord then killed the plant, and Jonah was upset. The Lord then questioned Jonah's morality. Jonah 4, verses 9 through 11, New English Translation, quote, God said to Jonah, are you really so very angry about the little plant? And he said, I am as angry as I could possibly be. The Lord said, you were upset about this little plant, something for which you have not worked, nor did you do anything to make it grow. It grew up overnight and died the next day. Should I not be even more concerned about Nineveh, this enormous city? There are more than 120,000 people in it who do not know right from wrong, as well as many animals. Unquote. The story ends there with the Lord's challenge to Jonah. It doesn't tell us what Jonah's response was. This was done on purpose. It is up to us, the readers, to examine our beliefs about the Lord's mercy and forgiveness toward our enemies. Do we want the Lord to smite those who have harmed us? Or do we want him to forgive them and be gracious to them? In the final section of this lesson, we move from the northern kingdom of Israel to the southern kingdom of Judah and the prophet Micah. The superscription tells us that Micah came from Moresheth, a small town about 20 miles southwest of Jerusalem, and that he prophesied in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, three kings of Judah whose reigns spanned 750 to 686 BC. His name, Micah, means who is like God. In other words, who can compare to God's unique perfection and holiness. References in Micah's writings to the fall of Israel in 721 BC and to the Assyrian campaign against Judah in 701 BC place Micah's ministry in the last 2 decades of the 8th century. This makes him a contemporary of the prophet Isaiah. In fact, Micah and Isaiah both quoted the same prophecy of the restoration of the temple in Jerusalem. Micah is the only prophet who is quoted by another Old Testament prophet with attribution. More than 100 years after Micah's ministry, Jeremiah prophesied that Jerusalem would be destroyed. The elders of the city quoted the prophet Micah in support of Jeremiah's prophecy. From this, we know that Micah's prophecy was already accepted by Jews as authoritative before the Babylonian exile. The book of Micah has 3 main parts. Chapters 1 through 3 are oracles of judgment. Chapters 4 through 5 are oracles of hope. Chapters 6 through 7 are oracles of judgment, followed by hope. Micah proclaimed that the sins of Israel had come to Judah like an open wound that had infected another person. For the sins of her people, Micah prophesied that Jerusalem would be destroyed and the people of Judah would be taken captive to Babylon. But Micah also prophesied that Judah would be gathered and restored to her lands, and that the town of Bethlehem would be the birthplace of the Davidic Messiah who would rule over Israel. Like Amos and Hosea, Micah taught the importance of ethics over outward performance. Micah 6, verses 6 through 8, English Standard Version, quote, "With what shall I come before the Lord, and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God?" Unquote. So what is the take-home message from these 4 books of prophecy? The Lord is not nearly as concerned with outward acts of devotion as he is with justice, mercy, covenant faithfulness, and purity of heart. The Lord calls us to show compassion for the poor, the weak, and the disenfranchised in our society, as well as to show forgiveness and love for our enemies. Finally, the Lord has promised that he will restore the people of Israel and Judah, forgive their sins, and reconcile them to himself. That concludes this lesson. If you enjoyed it, please click the thumbs up button and leave a comment below. Please subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new lessons are posted to this channel, and visit www.huarc.org to download these notes, the handout for this lesson, and this slideshow. The next 5 lessons will be an in-depth study of the book of Isaiah. In the first lesson, I'll introduce his writings and the opening chapters of the book of his prophecies. The reading is Isaiah chapters 1 through 6. See you next time.